Welcome everyone, folks that are in the webinar and that are joining us on the live stream as well. Good to have you here. And thank you to our storytellers who are here tonight and willing to put yourselves on the line and share your story about your connection to Vermont. I'm Jenna Kolaski. I'm the Community and Policy Manager with the Vermont Council on Rural Development. We are a neutral facilitator of public process. We facilitate conversations at the community and state level. And for the past 2 days, we have spent the days reflecting with over 700 Vermonters at the Summit on the Future of Vermont and asking them, what do we love about this state? But also, what do we need to work on? What are the issues that we need to tackle in the next 3 years to be successful in the next 30? I'm sure everyone who's joining us probably has a story to tell about your connection to Vermont and your community and why you've chosen to call this place home. Or maybe even a challenge that you've experienced living here or something that you hope to change. And tonight we've posed these questions to our storytellers in the hope that we'll hear their story and listen to others' stories, and it can kind of help us point towards a common vision for the future. And as we think about the work ahead, reflecting on these last 2 days, it's really more important than ever that we listen to each other. And telling our stories and listening to the stories of others is an important way to understand the many different ways that we experience the state and the diverse array of voices and perspectives that make the state who we are. And this is going to be key as we recover from the past challenges of the past year and a half and move ahead together towards a brighter future. So really excited to kick this off and hand it over to Suzanne Schmidt, a comedic storyteller and the producer and frequent host of the Moth Story Slam in Burlington. Suzanne, thank you so much for pulling this together and leading the event. I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks so much to the Vermont Council on Rural Development for having us here. It's a pleasure to be a part of this collaborative. Like Jenna said, I'm a producer and a storyteller, and no matter where I travel in the world, I am always asked the same question: why storytelling? Now, I could talk about the science, or technically the neuroscience of storytelling, and how listening to a great story tells our brain to distribute oxytocin and dopamine and all of those good feelings that happen. Or I could talk about the art of storytelling and how listening to someone's story allows us to feel what that person might have been feeling. But the truth is, storytelling is really about the intersection of art and science. And very simply, when we hear another person's story, we are bearing witness to the road that they have traveled and hopefully broadening our understanding of that road. Fred Rogers said it best when he said, there isn't anyone you couldn't learn to love once you have heard their story. I want to thank the incredible storytellers that you are going to hear for being with us here tonight. You are going to hear 6 true first-person stories about people's connection to Vermont, why they came, why they're here, why they love it, maybe even why some of them feel challenged in their path here in Vermont. My hope is that by the end of this hour, you too will understand the power of first-person narrative through the eyes of these 6 incredible Vermonters. So without any further ado, please welcome to the stage our very first storyteller, Mr. Mark Snelling.
Hi all, I'm just getting set up here, getting my timer going, but I'm delighted to be here. I want to thank Paul Costello, the Vermont Council on Rural Development. Wonderful 2 days of looking at the joys of Vermont, the challenges of Vermont. What a fun couple of days. I'm going to tell my story, and I'm going to tell it a little bit differently. I've figured out a way to have slides on the screen. I hope you enjoy it. For me, Vermont is really about her people, the culture, the values, and the environment. And I really see it as a story about legacy. There's a legacy which we have all received from the generations that went before us, and a legacy that we leave to the generations after us. And so our goal is to try and make sure we leave Vermont a better place than where we started. So I was pretty good at figuring out a way to get to Vermont. At 3 years old, I was a great negotiator, and I convinced my parents to come to Vermont. And so they did. It was not easy, but I started working at it when I was about 2 years old. And by 3, I convinced them to come. One of the things that I've always viewed as important in my life has been what I call guides and spirits. There's a wonderful song by Van Morrison called Checking It Out, where he talks about at all the obstacles along the way sometimes may feel so tremendous. There are guides and spirits all along the way who will befriend us. And I'm going to tell you about a couple of those guides and spirits along my way who have befriended me. When I was a child, we lived on Shelburne Point and out near the end of Shelburne Point. And out near the end of Shelburne Point, between Shelburne and the island of Juniper, there's a small rock that many people call Rock Dunder. I was taught at a very early age that it was really to be called Adzioso. And the story of Adzioso is an Abenaki story, an Abenaki legend, and that legend has guided me through my life. That as I have gone along, I have enjoyed the story. The story goes like this, that when the great creator started creating the earth, he sprinkled grains of rock down towards the earth. At some point, Adzioso started piecing together those grains and became sort of a being. And he formed a head, and then he formed arms, and he formed a torso. But he wasn't able to get up. And so he struggled to try and get up. And as he struggled and tried to push his way up with his arms, he pushed one way, and that turned to create the Adirondacks. He pushed the other way, and that turned to create the Green Mountains. He reached out with his fingers and started to try and pull himself up. And when he tried to pull himself up, he clawed into the Adirondacks and the Green Mountains, and they became the rivers that we know today. At some point, he had enough strength to pull himself up, and where his torso had been, the waters that the great creator sent down, those streams and the rivers, filled up and created Lake Champlain. And so Adzioso then went on to many existences, but when he eventually came back to the area, he decided he would form himself into this beautiful rock in the middle of Lake Champlain because of its great beauty that he could see forever and ever into the future. And so I've loved that story because it tells me of the great joy, the culture of the Abenakis and how we have moved along. This is another shot of Adzioso. Then just some beautiful pictures along the way. There's when I'm about 7, looking out at Adzioso with my sister. More beautiful pictures. But I had been away at school for 7 or 8 years out of the state of Vermont. In the meantime, my parents were getting ready to do politics and getting more and more involved. When I was about junior in college, my father came to me and asked me whether I would consider taking over his business and running the business in the future if he decided to run for governor. I told him no. I wanted to create my own path. I wanted to create my own legacy. And so time went along. I graduated from college. I might add, there's a picture of the business. I might add, I was not exactly what you might think of as a standard business person look. I had the red plaid on and everything. But as I got towards graduation, and here I am graduating from college, again, right out of the musical Hair. But when I went home after graduating, I was there for about 2 weeks. I had a ticket to go to Colorado, and my father said, "Hey, wouldn't you come work for me?" And I've got a crisis at the office, and I need you to come work. And I said, "No, we talked about this a couple of years ago. I'm not your guy. Find someone else." We went away for a couple of days, and then he came and he said, no, really, it's a crisis. I need you. You understand all the pieces and parts. I said, oh, okay, I'll do it for 3 months. I'll earn a little money. And he said, okay. At about 2 months, I loved it. I was having a great time. And so I said, hey, could I stay a little bit longer? And he said, well, only if you do 2 years. Now who's the great negotiator? So eventually I ended up buying the business with my siblings, and had a quite good career. At the same time, my father went on to run for governor and be elected to 5 terms as governor. My mother ran 3 times for lieutenant governor and was elected. During that time period, I was appointed by Governor Dean, Governor Cunin, Governor Douglas, to a variety of commissions and so on. I was one of the founding chairs of Housing Vermont, the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, the Vermont Land Trust. And I noted that the only 2 governors during my adult lifetime that didn't appoint me anything were Governor Snelling and Governor Shumlin. And I don't know, maybe that's the only thing that they had in common, that they didn't appoint me to anything. I even went on, so this is a picture of the bicentennial in Vermont that occurred a couple of days after my father died. You can see we're back to Odzioso here. At the top of my parents' memorial is Mount Mansfield and Camel's Hump. And when it rains, the streams come down just as they would on the real mountains. So in 2010, I decided, what the heck, I'd give a try to politics. So after all the experience I had on those commissions and everything, working with my parents, I decided, well, I'll shave off my beard of 41 years and take a run at it. So I went ahead and ran for lieutenant governor. It was one of the best times of my life. I didn't win. I lost to a fellow by the name of Phil Scott. I don't know where he is today. Okay, I'm pretty sure he's a race car driver, but that's all I know. But there's a picture of Selig. Later on, after that, running for lieutenant governor, I took over as the volunteer president of the Snelling Center, which is a leadership training organization dedicated to the memory and the values of my parents. And so we do leadership training, the Vermont Leadership Institute, over 600 graduates, the Vermont School Leadership Program, the Vermont Early Child Leadership Institute. We have over 1,000 graduates total that are around Vermont and are leaders for the future. And they are, in fact, the legacy. So the irony for me is that after spending all those years trying to avoid being in Vermont, trying to avoid my parents' shadow, I ended up part of their legacy, and their legacy and my legacy combined, hopefully for great leadership in the future. Back to the environment and the people. In 1983, Governor Snelling said, the environment, our challenge is to preserve those things about Vermont for which we love her, while building economic opportunities so it is not necessary to be already wealthy to enjoy this unusual place. To meet that challenge, we must begin with a determination to protect our environment. If we fail there will be little point to success in the economic arena, because we would have lost that which we wish to be able to afford. If the prize is gone, the struggle loses meaning. The Vermont environment is the prize. And then about the people, he said, and I dare say every president of the United States to this very moment understands the Vermont spirit of independence and the high expectations we have for our state. It is an exception that encourages Vermonters to seek to do more than would otherwise seem possible. My story is the love and the passion for the environment of Vermont that started out with the guides and spirits of Odzioso, ended up with the guides and spirits of so many wonderful people, including my parents. So I leave you with this beautiful picture from the home that I've been so lucky to live in, that I look at every morning and just enjoy the great people and the environment of Vermont. And I thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to hearing my fellow storytellers.
Thank you, Mark. That was a fabulous, fabulous story. It makes me realize that I paid very little attention during history class. because there's a lot of information that I did not know. And so next time, I will pay closer attention during my history class. And I took some notes so that I can give some information. I think the piece that I just really love the most is that hairstyle is a hairstyle that I experienced when I first came to Vermont, which was the same year that the Grateful Dead decided that they were going to play in Vermont. And I came to Vermont thinking, wow, every Vermonter must have that same hairstyle. And here it is, a truth that is something I will hold very dear. Thank you so much to Mark Snelling. We are so excited to have you here as a storyteller, and also grateful for everything that you have done to contribute to the leadership in Vermont and continue.
Thank you, Susan.
Our next storyteller is a storyteller that I saw a few years ago, who bravely stood on stage and told an incredible story. I'm not going to tell you much about them right now. I'm going to wait until the story finishes, and then I will give a proper introduction. But please welcome our next storyteller to the stage, Max Jennings.
So I never imagined going to my high school prom. Being a young queer kid in Central Vermont, it just didn't really make sense to me to go to prom because of all the gendered rituals that were at play there. But if 17 magazine taught me anything, and it taught me a lot of different things, it taught me that high school prom cannot be missed. And if it's missed, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. I was convinced, so I decided I had to go to my high school prom. Thankfully, my fabulous, flamboyant friend, Justin, who was straight at the time, who's now gay and wonderful, invited me to go with him. And I said yes. And to prepare for the big night, I did a fashion show for my mom at my house. And I decided to go with a white button-down shirt with blue pinstripes going down, and had darts to show off my figure, and black dress pants and my trusty blue Crocs. And I was ready to hit the road. I jumped in my tracker that night and I drove over to Justin's house. When I was driving over to his house, he lived on a long dirt road. So I was going down the road and I see this man running towards me. He's wearing a full tuxedo and his hair is slicked to the side. He had shoes that looked like mirrors because they were so shiny. And he had something in his hand. It looked like a clear container full of flowers. And as he gets closer to me, I'm creeping down the driveway. He gets closer to me, I realize it's Justin. And he goes like this. You know, the sign for roll your window down. And so I roll my window down and I stick my arm out because he asked me to stick my arm out. I stick my arm out and he slides on this giant bouquet of flowers. I had no idea what he was doing. And he said, do you have my boutonniere? Do you have my boutonniere? I need it. Like that will complete this outfit. And I have a spot for it right here. And I said, Justin, what are you even talking about, a boutonniere? I didn't get the gendered rituals. It just didn't make sense. And he said, you know what? Never mind. He got in the tracker, we backed up down the driveway, and we headed towards prom. Now, my high school prom was in our school cafeteria, but you wouldn't guess it once you walked in. There's a beautiful big balloon arch, and you walked in through that, and it was darkly lit, and there was a DJ spinning the latest hits, the Backstreet Boys songs. And girls were dancing with boys, boys were dancing with girls. There was a chaperone perimeter as well. And there was a large snack table. And during prom, I had a great time. I danced during the fast songs, and on the slow songs, I sampled all the different varieties of crackers. And there was one song that I had to dance to, one slow song I had to dance to, and it was Stairway to Heaven. And now Stairway to Heaven is that 8-minute long song, and it's kind of a rite of passage in my high school. And I thought, you know what, I'm here, let's just make this happen. So I asked a boy to dance with me, and we danced. And I remember as the song was going, probably like 5 minutes in, I felt his hands on my hips and I just thought something just isn't right. Like this still just doesn't feel like this is my place. I don't know if these are my people, but I just had to keep dancing. And as soon as the last note played, the lights were turned on and turned back into a cafeteria, and my high school straight prom was over. Now fast forward, 3 months, and I'm preparing for my first gay prom. I hope people are cheering there. And to prepare for your first gay prom, you have to go through your father's meticulously organized military closet. So I went through my dad's closet, rummaging around. I tried on everything, his belts, his hats, his socks, his shirts, his pants, and nothing fit quite right except for a red satin necktie. So I put that on. I told my parents I was going up to Burlington to hang out with some friends, got back into the tracker, and I drove up to Burlington because Burlington at the time was the only place where a queer prom would happen. So as I was driving up to Burlington, I cranked up Melissa Etheridge, like the way I do, and I cruised up to Burlington. And I had to finish out the outfit. So I stopped at the big JCPenney's in Burlington at the mall. And it was the first time I shopped in the men's section. And I ended up with a white button-down shirt, which was 2 sizes too big. I didn't realize it at the time. And black pleated pants. And I got dressed in my car. I put the outfit on. I put the red satin necktie around my neck, popped my blue Crocs back on, and I headed straight for prom. And prom was at 242 Main Street. And 242 Main Street has this psychedelic swirl pattern on the outside of the door. And there was this lone red balloon, half inflated, hanging outside. And I thought, this must be it. So I walk up to the door, I take a deep breath, and I crack it open. And as I crack it open, it's like entering Narnia. The air was thick and steamy. It was dark. There was a DJ moving their body to Whitney Houston, you know, the 80s hit, I Want to Dance with Somebody. There was a snack table. There weren't any chaperones to be seen. And I thought, these are my people. And I danced. I danced a fast song. I danced to slow songs. Girls were dancing with girls. Boys were dancing with boys. I just felt so right in my body. And I met all these new friends. I was having a great time. And the DJ kept mentioning, oh, prom king and queen. And I thought, whatever, I'm just feeling it. And I didn't know that many people. So I thought, there's no way that I would get that. And before you know it, the DJ makes the announcement. Prom king, my name is called. And I'm walking up to the stage and they put this bedazzled crown on top of my head that's bejeweled. And I'm slow dancing with a girl in the middle of this space. And everyone looks so happy. I feel like I'm floating on a cloud as I'm dancing to that song. And I didn't want the night to end. So I invited some of my new friends to go out for a slice of pizza down the street. So we leave the prom and we start walking into town. And I'm strutting, and I'm not a strutter. And I started strutting, and I felt like I was just floating. And I was laughing, having a great time, and we're waiting on the corner for the crosswalk sign to come on. And his Honda Civic pulls right up to us, and this guy leans out of the back seat, and he screams at us. And he screams, "You fucking fags!" And he says all these other terrible things to us. And I didn't know what to do. I just froze. I couldn't do anything. I was speechless. Didn't he know that I was king of Narnia? Didn't he see this crown on top of my head and me having fun with my friends laughing? But he didn't see that. And my friends started yelling back at him, but I couldn't do anything. And we went to pizza after that. I don't really remember it that well. I did keep the crown on top. And I got back in my car after that and I drove back home. And I didn't listen to anything on my way back home. And when I got home, I looked at myself in the mirror with the crown on top of my head, and I took it off and I folded it up and I put it into a drawer. And that's where it sat for a very, very long time. And now some of us have to go back to Narnia more than once to know it's real. And that's what I've been doing. I've been going back again and again and again, because after all, I am King of Narnia.
Max Jennings, the prom king of Narnia. Thank you so much for bravely sharing that story. Loved it when I heard it, and I love it again. And thank you so much. For those of you that don't know Max, Max is a physical education teacher and lives in Central Vermont, and also makes these amazing bandanas. Look Max up and you will find, you might have seen a sewing machine in the background. So don't know if you're sewing prom king crowns, although that might be the next thing you want to get into. But also spends a lot of time seeking the best cup of coffee, which, as we all know, in Montpelier, there's a lot of places where you can find a great cup of coffee. So thank you so much again to Max for being here and sharing your story. On to our next storyteller, Mr. Marlon Fisher. You might know Marlon Fisher as Big Fish, stand-up comedian. He's a host for the Moth. He's the father of a couple of amazing children that at some point may just pop onto the screen because they're like that. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Marlon in a minute, but please welcome our next storyteller, Mr. Marlon Fisher.
I spent the early part of my life constantly looking over my shoulder. You see, as a boy growing up in the hood, in the hood of Brooklyn, New York, I had to make sure that I stayed safe. And that I did. And at the age of 10, I got an opportunity to attend a summer camp on the shores of Lake Champlain. When I arrived at this camp, I was so scared and so nervous and so anxious to live in a world which I never experienced before. I was around kids who came from wealth, who played lacrosse. I had no idea what lacrosse was. And it took me a long time to adjust. It took me a while to adjust. One is because in that world, I still felt unsafe. Young boys my age were curious about me and where I came from, and I was curious about them. I struggled to develop relationships. But in that time, my leaders worked with me, and I was able to make some of the closest friends that I would ever in my entire life that would still be with me today, to this day. And to this day, and here we are, and here I am 20 plus years later, based off that experience, and I've learned so much. I've learned so much about myself. I've learned to adapt and overcome. And it was in that experience, being on the shores of Lake Champlain in Westport, New York, that led me and would lead me to my connection to Vermont. See, it was a long journey. The journey was so long. And one part of that journey was my rite of passage into manhood. You see, at the age of 14, most campers have to do something called the senior night experience. And that's when they take you into the woods during dusk and you walk up a trail until the sun goes down. But during that entire time, you're learning how to use your senses, how to hear the crunch of leaves below your feet, how to smell the wetness of the air, listen to the stream that's running by, that's to your right. And as it gets darker and darker, the fear just sets in, and the anxiety, the feeling of being lost in the woods alone. So as you get to the beginning of the trail, everyone sits and we talk about our fears as young men. And then one by one, at 7-minute intervals, you have to walk a mile by yourself with no flashlight and maybe a whistle that's stapled in a brown paper bag. And I remember walking down the trail and seeing the shadows of the moonlight and hearing the sounds of animals scurrying as I scared them, and as I was frightening them, being frightened myself. But I made it. I made it to the end of that trail, and when I made it to the end, I knew that I could overcome anything. I knew I could overcome and adapt to anything. So fast forward 20 years later, I'm in the military. I joined the Army during a time of war. And I can remember getting ready to go head to Afghanistan. My M16 and my laptop. That was the real weapon I used, my laptop. And the first night of me being in Afghanistan, I was so afraid, again, so afraid. This feeling came over me. And I can remember doing my first load of laundry at Kandahar Air Base, and then the sirens go off and there's a mortar attack. And immediately, the first thing you do is you're supposed to drop to the ground and just wait until it's called off, or you hear explosions. And I remember laying there next to my battle buddy, just thinking to myself, what am I doing? This is nothing like a walk in the woods. Well, during that time, my year in Afghanistan, I experienced loss. I experienced not having love. I experienced not being close to my friends and family. But I had to learn to adapt and overcome so that I can complete the mission and become the better man, the better person. When I remember my last night in Afghanistan, I remember my last night where I was laying in a tent full of several hundred soldiers, and the sirens went off just like that first night. And you're supposed to get up and run and drop for cover and go into the bunker. But I remember just laying there and picking my head up slowly and looking to my left and right, and no one moved. I knew I wasn't the only one who heard it. We all just laid there and accepted what our faith would be. And off in the distance, I could hear the explosions, and I fell back asleep. The next morning, I woke up, and we were preparing to leave, and we were the unit leaving, and there was a unit coming in to replace us. And while we were exiting the tent, I ran into a guy who went to the same summer camp many years prior, Doug Green. I'm going to say his name, Doug Green. And in the 7 minutes that we've spent together, my soldiers, his soldiers, we shared a story from our summer experience. And we all laughed and hugged and went our separate ways. And that was in May of 2011. And then in August of 2011, Doug died from injuries suffered from an IED explosion and a small arms attack. Protecting his soldiers, doing what him and I had learned so many years prior at summer camp, to put the other fellow first. See, what I've learned is don't be afraid. I'm afraid because I was afraid to put myself out there. But what I've learned is to really take care of others and be there for them. And when I returned, when I was thinking about moving back to the United States, I was thinking about moving back to New York City. But I couldn't for some reason because I knew that I would be on high alert all the time because of my experience being deployed. I'm always watching what's going on around me. That anxiety level, so much. And because I had attended the camp across the lake on the shores of Lake Champlain, I decided to go to the biggest city town, Burlington, Vermont. And that is my connection. And in these past 8 years, I have been able to build relationships, reestablish my relationships with nature, but most importantly, start a family. Start a family and be in control of my anxiety, be in control of my fears, and be a good father. Thank you.
Marlon Fisher, the big fish, never disappointed to hear little snippets of Marlon's life. Marlon, thank you so much. We're so glad you came to the biggest city town in Vermont and that you're here with us. In addition to telling amazing stories and comedy and hosting, Marlon works for the Department of Children and Families in juvenile services. He also is I think, founding, if I can use that, member, I know, very, very active member of Dad Guild, which is an organization here in Vermont that supports fathers to be the best dads that they can be. And he is also just a community leader in so many ways. Marlon, thank you for being here tonight and sharing that incredible, incredible story. Our next storyteller coming up to the stage is Mr. Kevin Gallagher. And some of you know Kevin Gallagher. I won't say where you know Kevin Gallagher from. We'll leave a little bit of suspense to that. But I suspect some of you might know him from the stories that he tells. And if you have never heard Kevin tell a story, you are in for a treat tonight. Mr. Kevin Gallagher coming up.
So growing up in Washington, D.C., before things like air conditioners existed, the really oppressive hot air extended far beyond the House and Senate chambers. So my family would escape the humidity of Washington every summer to come to Vermont for 2 weeks, and we would go to Lake Bomazeen, which we call Bomo. We rented the same rundown camp every year, floors sort of like this. So back when kids were really little and they were in those things that could roll around on the floor, they were always stuck down in the corner next to the bathroom because they couldn't get up the hill in the room. But I have to tell you, it was awesome. It was awesome. Now, the particular summer I want to tell you about was the summer I turned 10, because I was going to be in Vermont at that time. And there was something very special about turning 10, other than the obvious, I go from 1 digit to 2 digits. But it seemed as though parents at 10 begin to groom you for adulthood, that they sort of think there's things you need to be learning, even if they're things that you don't really want to learn. And I had a sense of that sort of this summer I turned 10 in Vermont. Now, traveling from DC to Vermont was very different back in the day. Some of you may remember these times. They were sort of when seat belts were considered accessories and speed limits were considered suggestions. My parents liked to drive the 13-hour trip leaving at midnight, so we would arrive in the morning. It was also much cooler to travel at that hour. So at 11:30, they would wake me and my sisters up, and we would, in our pajamas, we would get in the car. My father had a blue Plymouth Valiant. So I had the back seat because I was the oldest. My sister had the shelf, as we called it, behind the back window. And then my little sister had one of the floor holes, between the hump. And it worked really fine until my father would stop quickly, and then we all landed on top of my little sister, and she didn't really like that very much. But my mother was famous for packing a cooler full of lots of treats for the kids, snacks, sandwiches, a couple of 6-packs of Miller Lite beer for my dad to help him stay awake. There were enough Marlboros, to last us, God, I don't know how many months. But when we arrived at the lake, it was like heaven. Like, jump out of the car, put on your bathing suit, and you never take it off again. Eat, sleep, everything in your bathing suit. And our parents, because times are very different then, our parents would sort of sit at the camp and they would play cards and they would drink and smoke and talk, a lot of talking. And us kids, because there were tons of kids, and we also had other families from Maryland and Virginia that would join us, we pretty much ruled the beach and ruled the lake. Because that back then, for some of you younger people that might be listening, back then parents weren't as interested in their children as they seem to be now. And kids didn't really want to hang out with their parents as much as they do now. So it was a very, very different time. But now, the morning of my 10th birthday, we're all assembled at the beach. I have my bathing suit on and my life preserver. And there's a lot of discussion, surprise, surprise, mostly the men, discussing sort of like, how are we going to get Kevin up and out of the water? So there was the sitting on the edge of the dock, and then we sort of take off. There was the standing on the shore with your skis on and just going. And then there was the traditional method of sort of floating around in the water with your skis up and the line in between your legs. And they decided to do that one. And of course I knew nothing of this because I have never had a desire to learn how to water ski. This was something that they thought I should learn, and that this was going to be my birthday present. Never had a fantasy of water skiing on the Potomac or across the reflecting pool. This was not in my lexicon at all. So I get in the water, life preserver, makes you not be able to see anything when you're 10. And skis are up, wobbly, lying between my legs. My uncle is driving the boat. Everyone else is in the boat. And he said, so Kevin, I'm going to go really, really slow. And then the line's going to get taut. And then I'm going to gun it. And you're going to fly out of the water. So I'm like, okay. So I'm standing there and the line gets taut. And he gives me the signal. And he guns it. And out of the water I go. And I'm like, oh my God. And everyone's cheering on the boat. I don't really actually know what they're cheering for, but because I don't really know what I'm doing. And so I do this for a while, and then I kind of panicked because I thought, well, no one talked with me about what you do next. So I let go. So my uncle circles back around. He said, what are you doing? And I said, well, what am I supposed to do? And he said, that's it. That's it. That's called water skiing. You get up on the water and you ski. And I'm like, I know, but how long do I do this for? And he goes, until you fall. So I'm like, okay, well, let's do it again. Well, I can't tell you how many times I tried and did not get up again that year I turned 10, and actually did not get up a year I turned 11. I was either leaning too far forward, I was leaning too far back, and my butt was dragging in the water. My skis went in different directions. It was a valuable lesson, though, because I came to appreciate that you don't get a lot of confidence in life by having things come too quickly. It's actually sort of perseverance and failure and sticking with something that actually helps you grow, no matter how much lake you drink in the process. And so for these reasons, my Lake Bomazine lessons was enough to make me eventually call Vermont my home. Thanks.
Oh, Kevin Gallagher never disappoints. Oh, the visual of you being dragged through the water, just sucking in gallons of lake. That's going to be hard to get out of my head later on, I have to say. Kevin Gallagher is a psychotherapist, has been a psychotherapist for many years, and he listens to other people's stories for a living and helps them to rewrite some of the endings to those stories. Not born here, as he told you, but his love of Vermont really qualifies him to be a Vermonter. So, Kevin, we thank you so much for that story. Our next storyteller, I must confess, is someone whose name I hear in almost every circle I travel in. And every single time I hear this name, her name is accompanied by this gesture. Judy Dow. Oh, people grab their chest and they exhale just a little bit. And I think you're going to understand why when you hear her story. I'll tell you a little bit more about Judy in a minute, but please welcome our next storyteller, Judy Dow.
Thank you, Suzanne. So when I was little, I was the oldest of 5 girls, and we frequently fought in the evenings when my father was home to sit in his lap so he could tell us stories. We didn't have a lot of books. We had a couple of books that had anthologies, many stories in them, Aesop's fables and stuff like that. So he would read those over and over and over till the pages were thin. The rest of the time, he would tell us stories orally. He wasn't home often. He worked for the Burlington Fire Department. And so he worked 2 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on, 1 day off. And on that day off, we'd all fight to sit on his lap on this big red leather chair. My whole entire life, I thought it was a big red leather chair. I didn't find out till I was about 50 that it was vinyl. But that was okay. In my mind, it was still a red leather chair. So my father would tell us stories about this family member and that family member and how this one disappeared and how his mother abandoned him when he was 5 years old. And he would always tell us these stories, and he would say, you need to learn how to take care of yourself. There might not be someone there to take care of you sometimes. So you really need to know how to take care of yourself. And there were he was kind of vague about why we had to learn to take care of ourselves. So we traveled from Burlington to South Zero every year. From October to April, we were in Burlington. From April to October, we were in South Zero. We lived on a dirt dead-end road where all my uncles, aunts, and grandparents lived, hundreds of cousins. We all lived together on this one dirt road. So I go back to school each year, and finally I get to Burlington High School. And in my junior year in Burlington High School, we were given a textbook to read called We Americans, The Cleavage of American City. And I started to read it, and there were things in it that sounded vaguely familiar to me, but I just couldn't put my finger on what it was. So I started asking questions, and the teacher said to me, this is a textbook, my dear. You have to believe what's in a textbook. So I started asking my father stories from the book. They kind of sounded familiar. And I'm like, Dad, do you know about this? Yeah, I remember hearing something about that. And again, he was still very vague. So I spent the next 3 decades of my life trying to figure out the connection with that book and the stories my father was telling me. And what I discovered was someone who became a very dear friend, Nancy Gallagher. And she's the author of Breeding Better Vermonters. And in her book, I also found stories that sounded familiar. So that led me to the eugenics records and additional stories. And I discovered that our family was the largest family in the eugenics records. And for those of you who don't know what the eugenics program is, Vermont ran a program between 1925 and 1937 to determine subjectively who was defective, dependent, and delinquent, and either institutionalize or sterilize those people. So once I discovered that, a lot of my father's stories began to make sense, and learning to take care of ourselves because nobody else was gonna also began to make sense. So I want to share with you a couple of little stories that my father told me that will add to my learning process. So the first story is about Lena and Ernest, and Lena was my father's cousin. And he told us this story about how in 4th grade, Lena's parents both died. And so that's as far as she went to school, and she had to work cleaning people's homes to survive after that. And he used to talk about, how tough times were during that period of time. By the time Lena was 18, she'd gotten pregnant and had a son named Ernest. And again, she really didn't have any help. The father of the baby wasn't helping. Occasionally his parents would help, to provide her with child care so that she could continue to work. But she didn't get any financial assistance from anybody. And then a couple of years later, she met this guy named Joseph. And everybody thought this was like the greatest marriage. He was Catholic. He was going to bring all these great things to her. And so at this point in life, she was going to have a great life. So they got married, and Ernest and Joseph and Lena moved to a little apartment above Winooski. and in Winooski above a little restaurant. And everything started to fall apart. Joseph never got a job. He never helped Lena raise Ernest. And she now was in a position where she was providing for Joseph and Ernest. And so she worked for about 9 years. She got rheumatic fever and ended up in the hospital. And Joseph said, well, I'm not going to start taking care of myself now. So he meets up with this other woman named Catherine. And Catherine moves into the little apartment with 3 children. Ernest kind of is there. He figures out that he can wash dishes for the restaurant below and make $4 a week, and they'll feed him. And he sleeps at the apartment. And so Lena eventually gets better, and she has no place to go because Catherine has taken over the apartment. So she hires a lawyer, and the lawyer's like, yeah, no, Joseph's not paying for anything with Catherine either. So she's paying for everything. So it's her apartment now. You got to find someplace else. So she does. She gets a job working at the cotton mills, woolen mills, and she gets $12 a week. She has to pay rent for $12 a week. So that leaves her nothing for food, nothing for clothing. She starts getting on lists. She gets on a list for the Vermont Children's Aid Society that help her get food. She gets assistance from the overseer of the poor for food. And she goes on this way for quite a few years, but then she dies when Ernest is about 13. And so the school's like, Ernest wants to drop out and work to survive. And the school's like, no, you can't do that. He's a really good student. The kids really like him, but he's not doing well in English. So we think we're going to send him to the University of Vermont to be tested. So he's tested by Professor Metcalf, and the test comes back and says that Ernest is a moron. And so Ernest struggles his whole life until he can get out of high school and get a job. He goes on, he graduates, he gets married, he has children, he becomes a productive citizen. And according to my father, the reason he was considered a moron was because he spoke French, not English. And so my father, that was one of the stories he would tell us to show us how you have to take care of yourself, how Ernest had survived and how Ernest had taken care of himself. And today he has many children, many of my cousins, and look how productive he was, right? So he's trying to make this comparison with himself. So as a child, my father at 5 years old was sent to an orphanage because he believed his mother had abandoned him, and that my grandfather couldn't take care of him because he had to work, and he couldn't work and take care of a 5-year-old at the same time. So my father was sent to St. Joseph's orphanage, and my grandfather would go to work, and after about 5 years, my father came back home, and my grandfather filed for divorce. And so in doing my research, I come across the divorce decree, and it says that my grandfather had filed divorce because my grandmother had abandoned them. And so I continued to do my research. I didn't tell my father. And when I found my grandmother's death certificate, it said she died at the Waterbury State Hospital of pneumonia, and her family was unknown. And the date she had died was when my father was 16. So from 5 to 16, he never knew his mother was alive. She had been scooped up and put in the state hospital, and nobody knew it. And so I'm like, okay, now's the time I need to tell my father. So I spent a lot of time teaching my father and telling him the story, just like he had told me as a child. And so I showed him the death certificate, and his father had died at 16. His mother had died at 16, and he said, that can't be. I was alive then, and I didn't know it. I said, Dad, she did. She died at the Waterbury State Hospital. He said, that's not right. There's something wrong with that. And I said, yeah, you're right. There is something wrong with that. And so I started to explain to him that the reason Lena and the reason Ernest had suffered, and all the people in all the other stories he had told us had suffered, was because they had been targeted by the Vermont Eugenics Survey. So I explained to my father, the Vermont Eugenics Survey was responsible for taking his mother away and what had happened. And my father sat there at 88 years old, and he said 2 words, those bastards. And that's all he said. Thank you.
Wow, Judy. Whew, that is an amazing story. And I thank you, and we thank you for bringing that forth. But more importantly, we thank you for the work that your stories have brought change to our state. And this very last year in the legislature, 90 years after the eugenics bill was signed into law, the state recognized the harm that had been done. And while that's not enough and change is slow, Judy, you are a big part of why change has come and change is coming, and we thank you so much. For those of you that don't know Judy, she's a native Vermonter, obviously. In 2004, she was the recipient of the Governor's Heritage Award as an outstanding educator. She is currently the director of the, I hope I'm not going to mispronounce this, Gadakina. Thank you, which is a nonprofit multi-generational endeavor to strengthen, revitalize the culture, knowledge, and identity of Native American youth and families from all across New England. So Judy, we thank you so much for being here tonight and sharing your incredibly powerful story.
Thank you.
Wow, the time flies. We've only got one storyteller left, but put your seat backs in tray tables in the upright position because you are in for a treat. Our final storyteller of the evening comes to us as a comedian, and you will see why. Please welcome to the stage, Mr. Renee Pellerin.
Just checking that we're set up right here. All righty, well, hello. When I was a little kid growing up, I was deaf. And I learned that, you know, my family, they were French speaking and they didn't know where to put me in school as a deaf kid. And they placed me pretty far away to school for the deaf. And so I was way far away from my family staying at school. One thing that really impacted me about the school, it was pretty astounding, was all the exposure to outdoor recreation. We did skiing, we did sledding, we did skating, all kinds of things, and sports. I was involved in all kinds of different sports at school. There was one special day every week on Wednesdays after lunch. We would all get into the bus and we'd head off to the mountains, ready for skiing the afternoon away. So I learned to ski and I learned a lot of, you know, some people were good, some people were not great. We all learned differently, but we had a great time every afternoon on Wednesdays. It's an incredible memory for me. Years later, as I got pretty old, you know, you can see here by my gray silver hair, my vision started to decline quite a bit. I became legally blind. But I really miss being outdoors enough. And I found Vermont Adaptive Ski and Sports. And they had this program for people with different disabilities. I thought, well, heck, I'm going to give that a try. And I reached out to them and said, hey, I'm deaf blind, and I really, really, really want to go skiing. Can you get somebody to help me out with this? And they said, yeah. They located 2 deaf volunteers who could sign fluently. I was so impressed. I was like, this is it. This is excellent. So we set up an appointment for them to come, and we had a little talk about what they were going to do and how they could support me so I could go out and enjoy skiing. We came to great consensus, and the way we did this was that I had some rope tethers attached to my belt loops, sort of like a dog leash, if you can imagine. So I had those on either side of me. There was somebody, a volunteer, who was behind me who would, so to speak, steer me as I went down the hill. I say that in quotes. And then the second volunteer wore a vest that was bright yellow and very shiny. They were in front of me because I still at that time had, a bit of tunnel vision that I could locate them with and follow them going down the hill skiing. So I thought, okay, well, let's try this out. And everybody, you ready? We headed up on the lift, got up to the top, and we were all set and ready to go. We had the shiny vest in front of me, and I made sure that I had them in my sights. And I said, yeah, let's go. And away we went. And I was skiing until I fell and bounced back down the hill. Well, my pole got all tangled up in the tether is what happened, doggone it. Anyway, we decided to try a little bit more. Went back on up on that lift, got up to the top. Everybody was ready. We headed out, and I was skiing. I was going one side to the other, and the person with the vest in front of me was like, came zipping around in a circular motion in front of me. And I thought, nah, I'm not following this circle. I'm going straight ahead. Well, that was a mistake. I went right over something and down I went. I really should have trusted that volunteer for their eyes. Doggone it. But back up we went a third time. Up in the lift. And we got up there, signaled ready. All right, head out. And I was skiing again. I was smooth going along down that mountain. It was a success. So you can actually probably find me. I was skiing at Sugar Bush. I like to go there. Come on and join me next year. Another thing I really enjoy in winter, long winter months, I love to snowshoe. I just love it. I like heading out with those snowshoes, plodding along, trees whipping by me, just the beauty of the trees with the snow covering all their boughs. It sort of like reminds me of Robert Frost, sort of the same kind of inspiration that I was seeing in those trees. And I'm going along. And then I look down, I notice there's rabbit scat along the trail. Then I come upon an area where obviously deer had bedded down at night. There's this circle left behind them. Pretty interesting. You can even see waterfalls that are frozen. And brave individuals actually climb up them with ice picks. Amazing thing to see, really impressive. And then frozen water. I find people ice fishing out there with their little ice shacks, keeping them warm as they fish. So interesting. Just really, it's a wonderful time of year. But then as the temperature starts to warm, the farmers start tapping the maple trees. There are buckets everywhere on each and every maple tree collecting. And as the temperature rises, the sap flows. Then it goes down at night, it stops flowing. And they're emptying bucket upon bucket, taking it to the sugar house, pouring it into boil. And you can just see that sweetness going by your nose in the air. And they'll even serve you some of it, that tap syrup. It's ready for your breakfast table. Oh, it's the best. Through the year, the temperature rises more. It's spring and time for farmers to start cultivating and plowing, ready for planting the vegetables, corn, for all the people and the animals. And the neighbors start their flower gardens. They start working on those beds with blooms all set out. Bushes start to fill out. It's just a thing of beauty. So amazing. Then as time goes on, summer. And that's the time for canoeing. Just moving along, again, seeing the beauty of the trees going by, spotting a deer off to the side, drinking water, and making eye contact as you keep going by. Whoa. Birds flying above till they poop right on you. Gotta wash that off in the cold water. Whoa. And a fish is trying to eat it all. They are hungry. What the heck are they eating? Keeping on with my canoeing as fall comes. I truly enjoy hiking and seeing the trees, climbing up and looking down a mountain into the valley. It is so beautiful with all the varied colors, the reds, the yellows, the oranges, and some green. Vermont is just exquisite. It just shows itself to all the visitors who come to Leaf Peep. So some friends and family from far away like to come to visit. And I brag by showing them everything that I so enjoy about Vermont. I take them to look at it all. A farm, as we pass it, the family saying, that stinks, what the heck? I'm like, oh, phooey on you, that's Vermont perfume, that manure you smell. Then again, it's fall and the trees start losing their leaves. Everything tumbles to the ground. Flowers are wilting everywhere. The beds are turned over for the winter. The temperature starts to go down. It gets dark earlier in the evenings. And then the snows start to come and builds up this beautiful white blanket. And the trees again are covered, just like the poetry of Robert Frost. You prepare the wood for fires in the fireplace. Sit and watch with your loved ones and put your heads together for the winter's evening. That's Vermont.
Renee. Thank you. Wow, that was better than Robert Frost. I don't know about you, but that was a perfect way to end this evening in celebration of Vermont. Renee, thank you for your story. Thank you for all you have done. Renee was the State of Vermont Coordinator of Services for the Deaf for many years. He retired. We all were sad to see him go. And then he decided very shortly after he retired, he didn't want to be retired anymore. And he is now one of the premier deaf comedians in our state. You can find him at Renee the Unstoppable. Look him up and check him out. Thank you so much for everyone that attended tonight. I want to give a big shout out to Jenna Kowalski, again, from the Vermont Council on Rural Development, for making this happen, and all the folks there that supported this storytelling event. Also, big shout out to Leslie Pelch, who is our behind the scenes tech person. So making everybody see each other. If you're still with us as attendees and you'd like to say something to the storytellers, please, please, please feel free to put a message in the chat to them. Usually when we're telling stories, we're in a room, you can feel us, we can feel you. It's not the same thing when we're virtual, but please, if you have some shout outs for the storytellers, throw them in the chat. We'll make sure that they see them. I'm gonna ask to just bring all the storytellers back on the stage so you can see them one more time. And again, big, big thanks to all of these incredible folks: Mark Snelling, Max Jennings, Marlon Fisher, Kevin Gallagher, Judy Dow, and Renee Pellerin. You are truly some of the best in Vermont and people that we have really enjoyed hearing from. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to our storytellers. Happy tales, and we will see you again. And this is that just kind of uncomfortable, odd moment where we all wonder, are people going to stay because maybe something else will happen? If you're still here, we will unmute the storytellers. If there's a question, we can ask. Larry Gubb says, thank you all so much for your inspirational and wonderful stories. Most inspiring, says Thomas Levitt. Our family embraced your stories. Thank you, Tom, from Tom, Diane, and JT Levitt. Sharon, thank you for being here. John, from here in Montpelier, our family really loved all of these stories tonight. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, lots of fabulous folks tuning in, and thank you, thank you, thank you for all of your comments and for being here with us tonight.